All right, well, welcome everybody. Can't thank you enough for joining us for our Fuse webinar for the month of January. I'm excited that Dr. David Yeager is going to be joining us today to really go into depth about his book that I know many of you have read already or you've seen. We're also going to be talking a lot about Fuse, about fellowship using the science of engagement, where some of you have teachers in our program already, but most of you on the call today, are excited to learn more and we'll also be talking about kind of what that would look like if we were going to partner for the 2025-2026 school year for your teachers to join at that point. When we're done today, I'll be following up to answer any kind of logistical questions about what this might actually look like for your teachers. But I don't want to take any more time away from Dr. David Yeager. He's here to share with us today, talk some about the research, some of the findings we've already seen from Fuse, as well as 10 to 25. So, David, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Great to see you, and thanks for spending time with us. I know everyone's very busy in your respective schools. So can you guys see my screen? Can you see my slides? Is that working, Ryan, or no?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to switch over to that. So if there's something in the chat, just speak up because I'll be looking at my slides.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So I wrote a book called 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. And in that book, I describe basically what the research is saying these days about engaging young people. And what's interesting is that at the same time that I was writing the book, we were developing a program to actually help put those ideas into practice. And so I'm excited to share a little bit about what that has looked like and what the results seem to be so far and what the big ideas are. So at a high level, very early on in this process, we talked to a lot of principals, superintendents, school leaders, and we heard about two dual problems. One is math performance is problematically low. There were plenty of issues before the pandemic, and they've certainly continued, and it seems to be worse if you look at NAEP and other large test scores. And at the same time, we're losing teachers. And the teachers we are keeping are reporting being more burnt out than they have been on really in any recorded time period. So the national surveys are showing some of the worst levels of burnout, and that's contributing to attrition. So we're losing teachers. And as I'm sure all of you know, one of the best ways to improve student math performance is to have more experienced teachers, more engaged teachers. And so these are kind of mutually reinforcing problems. And of course, there's a lot of causes underlying these issues. One hypothesis is that student disengagement contributes to both of these. And just to kind of spell that out for you, of course, when students aren't engaged, so when we put content in front of them, we get them, to the computer, to the platform, to a great worksheet, a good project, but they say, no, thanks, this isn't for me, or I'm not going to engage, then they aren't going to benefit from that, right? So they're not going to learn as much, and therefore they're going to perform worse. At the same time, when teachers feel as though their students are like impossible to motivate, when you've got that classroom where it's like pulling teeth to just get anybody to respond to anything you're saying, that's exhausting for teachers. And so student disengagement in large surveys actually ends up being the number one predictor of teacher burnout, more so, interestingly, even than salary. And so if that's the case, then if you could address student engagement, right, if you could flip that yellow box, then you should be able to improve both student math performance and teacher burnout. And I'm going to just front load our results here, and then we'll back up and explain kind of where they come from. But very briefly, our view is that if you could change teachers' mindsets and mindset practices, so the culture that they create in the classroom, then our theory of change goes that then teachers will be able to create classroom cultures that are more engaging. And once they have engaging classroom cultures, then students should learn more and teachers' lives should be better. Okay. So what we've done is we developed Fuse, which we'll tell you more about, and we conducted a large randomized trial. So this is using the most rigorous methods that we could think of. So large samples of schools. Teachers are randomly assigned to get fuse or not. And then we evaluate impact on teachers, on classrooms, on student performance, et cetera. And just to walk you through this, one of the first things we look at is teachers' mindsets, which we'll talk more about. And there's a number of mindsets that matter. One is the concept of fixed mindset you may be familiar with, that my mentor and advisor Carol Dweck first coined, and our collaborator Mary Murphy in her book Cultures of Growth she wrote about. And she wrote that a math teacher's fixed mindset is detrimental to student performance, especially in subjects like math and science, in part because students feel less respected. And when students feel less respected, they're less engaged, and that fuels teacher burnout. And so, importantly, what we find is that in Fuse, teachers' mindsets, months after the first day of Fuse, we're still seeing a reduction in teachers' mindsets. And just about all teachers end up on more of the growth side of the scale, not the fixed side of the scale. So that's like, can you change teachers' mindsets? The answer is yes. And look, I understand that's not the end all be all, but that's a good start, because it is kind of hard to change people's beliefs, especially if they've been in a classroom before and they've come to believe students, are hard to learn, hard to motivate, or hard to teach. If we can change that belief, then that's a good step. If teachers have a different mindset, they should be able to use practices that make students feel more respected. And therefore, if you ask students, do you feel respected? You should see higher levels of respect. And that's something we've written about in the past. In Fuse, we administer student engagement modules, they're called. So these are student surveys, and we give teachers reports. And hopefully, Ryan, you can show people those reports. And we ask a number of questions, but the question that I'm most excited about is very simple. It's, how respected do you feel by your teacher? We say it a little different, but that's basically the concept. And what we see is that students feel more respected by their teachers when they get Fuse teachers. And again, this is compared to a randomly assigned control group. We also, in some other analyses, find less math anxiety among students when they have a Fuse teacher, and even less depression on a very short depression inventory. So we're seeing improvements in students' kind of experience in the class, and then the spillover of that in their well-being. And again, I mean, a perennial problem, as we know, is that many secondary students in America are not dying to get into their math class. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, no, math teachers work as hard as they can to make it great and engaging. But unfortunately, many students are not reporting nationally that secondary math is their favorite experience. And with Fuse, though, we're seeing more positive reports about not only students feeling respected, they're also saying, I'd raise my hand and ask a question if I was confused. I feel less anxious, etc. So once students feel respected, then what should happen? Well, we think students should persist when they're confused. We think they should ask for, I don't know, more assignments whenever they are interested and engaged, right? They want to please the teacher at some level, and so they work hard to correct their mistakes, etc. If they do a lot of those behaviors over time, then you should see higher math performance. And in fact, what we find is about a 0.4 standard deviation improvement on math test scores in Fuse classrooms. And just to put this in perspective, the latest and greatest randomized trials that have evaluated high dosage tutoring, so this is like getting college math students to tutor secondary kids one-on-one or in small groups, those effects are about 0.04 standard deviations. So we're seeing 10 times the impact of individualized tutoring by helping Fuse teachers create this different, more respectful culture. And then last, again, if students feel respected and they're more engaged, then they're learning more, then you'd think that teachers would enjoy their jobs more because they're getting to be the kind of teacher they always wanted to be. And in fact, this is perhaps the most striking result. We see a 50% reduction in burnout and a 50% reduction in teachers saying that they're going to leave their current teaching job and or leave the profession altogether. And this is important because it's a real crisis right now with respect to teacher burnout and attrition. We see the largest effects for the teachers who had the most problematic beliefs prior to the experiment. So that's just the preview. So you might be asking, like, well, how is this possible? Like, what is happening that's allowing one program to have these kinds of impacts? And that's where I'm excited to get into the science. And regardless of whether you participate in Fuse, hopefully what I share is useful, because it can give you a lens for thinking about how these problems are not disconnected, that the math problem is not different from the teacher engagement and teacher burnout problem. They're actually quite related because of the student engagement problem. So let's just kind of back up now and think a little bit about adolescent development and how that is so important as we think about the cultures that students experience. And then that scientific knowledge, of course, is what we use to build Fuse. So let's just to start with the simplest idea. What does it look like when students are disengaged, right? Now, I asked a large group of school leaders and teachers in, I think, Spring Branch, I think, or A-Leaf, I forget where it was, about this question. And here are the kinds of things that they said. One is students' heads are down, so that's disengaged. Another is they're checking their phones, that is if they don't have a no phone policy. Another is asking for bathroom breaks, so that's interesting. Students know that the teacher would look like a totalitarian monster if they said no, so they fully exploit that whenever they don't want to be in class, and then they get to wander around the hallway. Another one is getting the teacher off topic. This one kind of makes me laugh, because students know that if a teacher has like a pet topic that they love to talk about, like Roman history or something, then no matter what the class is about, they'll ask the teacher about that and get them on and on and on. Or maybe the teacher's a coach and they're a track coach and they get them to talk about track that weekend, and now they've gotten the teacher to waste 30 minutes. So anyone who says adolescents aren't clever isn't paying attention, because these are some clever ways to be disengaged. But at a high level, the way you can summarize these kinds of things is that students are avoiding challenges, so they don't want to do the hard thinking when they're disengaged, and they're ignoring their mistakes. And that's a bummer, because it means that even if we correct their mistake, we give them plenty of assignments to fix their mistaken thinking, then they end up having made the same mistakes when they get to the EOC. So just to make this be a little more concrete, we did a study where we asked students to imagine later in the day that the teacher was going to give them a hard math problem, and they got to choose which one they got to complete. One option was a really challenging problem where they might learn a lot because it's covering content they don't know, but they might get it wrong. The other option is an easy problem where they won't learn anything new because it covers content they've already mastered, but they're likely to get it right. And we also told them they get the same amount of credit no matter what. So it was really a challenge-seeking task. And interestingly, what we found, so just in your mind, guess what percent of kids you think chose one problem or the other. What we found is that 63% of kids chose the easy problem, 37% chose the challenging problem. And I want to point out a couple things about that. So one is that when I ask people to guess, a lot of people guess 80 or 90% of kids would have chosen the easy problem. And that suggests that oftentimes we have a lower opinion of young people's challenge seeking than maybe we should, that they're a little bit more into challenge and learning than we give them credit for. But the other interesting thing is that, that it should be 0% choosing the easy problem. Because if you think about it, the whole point of schooling is to learn things you don't already know. So if students are choosing problems that are covering content that they've already mastered, then it's kind of a waste of everybody's time. So that's one way that disengagement manifests itself in the classroom. Another is that you get kids who, make a mistake like this on a pre-algebra problem, and then in May you see the same thing. And in the middle, there might have been 10 times you revisited this concept and brought it up on worksheets and retested it and re-explained it. But you tend to see these mistakes propagate over time. And again, that's an example of disengagement, because students aren't deeply processing their errors. So just quickly, I just would love to have you guys put in the chat, what does engagement look like to you in your school? So just to hear some examples from you guys. I'm just curious.
And anybody can, the chat, if you're unfamiliar with Teams, is up near at the top of your screen up there. You can click that chat icon and you should be able to enter something.
We could pretend like we're giving professional development credits for this, and you only get it if you put an answer in the chat.
Looks like a couple are
It would be
showing up.
ironic if I was that bad at engaging people that I had to threaten them with. It would be a little hypocritical, wouldn't it? But yeah, side conversations. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, not answering questions is a good one. Like you ask a question and then it's just crickets, and of course it's crushing for teachers. Yeah, completing the assignments and just rushing through, like Emily's saying, and then you point out the errors and they're like, "No, I'm good." Right? That's a version of ignoring mistakes. Yeah, yeah. Reading a book, working on something else. Yeah, that's interesting because like they're reading a book. It's not like they're disengaged from everything. It's just they're disengaged specifically from your thing in your class. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you guys for contributing. I appreciate your uh, support of this webinar. Okay. So what's the opposite of disengagement? It's engagement. What does that look like? We talked to a bunch of math educators and school leaders. Here are the kinds of things they said. Willing independent learning, not just compliance. Conceptual, not just algorithmic learning. The better student experience, like we showed you, and higher test scores. So you kind of get both. And then less frustration for teachers. So this version of engagement is why we hypothesized that Fuse would be a useful program for people. So where does this engagement come from? Now, there's a lot of people out there writing about this, and there's a lot of intuitive theories that people are kind of bandying about. I do want to remind us, though, that being disengaged as an adolescent is not like our state of nature, because you don't see slacker babies who like can't get it together. Like you don't see babies who are like, I'll just learn later, right? Um, when a baby sees a toy across the room that they want, they will do anything to go get that, right? Even if they're not good at walking, right? Um, and babies are just full of wonder. So every typically developing baby on the planet will acquire the ability to understand language before they're 1 year old and produce it within a few years. And they'll do that without any worksheets or sticker charts or anything like that. And they'll do it just because the human brain wants to understand the world and predict it and control it and have a place in it. And it's not like that feature of the human brain is like it doesn't disappear the minute puberty strikes, but something is happening, right? And we're seeing this disaffection, disengagement, the kind of blasé attitude, the lack of hope and optimism for their future. And if we're being honest, a lot of this continues even into the workplace. You've got maybe some of us have desk jobs that we're not thrilled about, or we have teachers who are questioning their life choices, right? And something is happening that's making us lose our love of learning and our engagement with challenging tasks basically every year since we start school and that's really the finding, that if you look at measures of intrinsic interest, of engagement, et cetera, you see it decline basically every year until a little uptick senior year of high school. But by senior year of high school, you're still not any better off than like sixth grade or fifth grade. So what happened? Now, some people are like, well, it was, COVID did this to us, or, social media. There's a guy, John Haidt, who has a book called The Anxious Generation that, spoiler, I think is nonsense science. So apologies to anyone in the middle of a book study on Haidt's book. But people have been complaining about adolescence throughout human history. And so even if it's convenient to blame something that happened in the last few years, it's probably not the primary cause. Like, here's Aristotle in the Rhetoric, and he's complaining about young people being impossible to engage and motivate. The young are in character prone to desire and ready to carry any desire they may have formed into action. They're fickle in their desires, which are as transitory as they are vehement. I mean, this sounds like a complaint you read in the Wall Street Journal op-ed section last week. Yet it's from thousands of years ago. So if it's not necessarily something new to human history that's causing this disengagement, then what is it? Here's 100 years of developmental science in one slide. Basically, teenagers' brains and hormones make them hypersensitive to status, how they look in front of others, how they feel about themselves. This sensitivity enhances their fear of failure, their fear of making mistakes, of looking bad, which is a really terrifying and likely prospect in their hardest courses. And that causes disengagement, that there's a worry about making a mistake publicly, right? But that's not all bad. That desire for status and respect can also be fuel and a source of motivation that helps young people transition to adulthood. For instance, when young people are first learning to drive, they have to merge on the freeway. And that's terrifying for a lot of people. There might be some adults on this call who don't feel 100% comfortable merging on the freeway, right? You have to read the minds of other cars. You have to be looking through the windows and guessing what they're thinking. You have to hit the pedal to the metal at just the right time. You have to not do it too much, right? You have to kind of merge right in. That takes a lot of courage. And if you never learn how to do that during the adolescence phase, it's actually very unlikely that you'll ever feel fully comfortable getting on the freeway, which means you just drive on the side of the freeway on the feeder the rest of your life, and you're just late to things, right? And so having the courage to figure out how to mind read and overcome your fear and really engage with something terrifying is good for development in that case. Yeah, another example is holding someone's hand for the first time. Like, that's a terrifying thing to have to do, right? You could reach for their hand and then they could push it away and make you feel like a loser, and then tell all their friends what a loser you are, right? That's a real prospect for a teenager. Or you could reach for their hand and they could accept it, and then you could feel the most accepted you've ever felt in your life, and it would feel amazing, right? If you never figure out the difference of, like, when is someone reciprocating your affection or not, then it's likely you just die alone, right? I mean, it's very hard if you never figure out how to have relationships, right? Then it's the most likely result is a life of loneliness. And so if you don't have the courage to figure out your social self and your relationships with others, then you miss out on positive developmental experiences. And so before society spends all this time trashing the teenage brain as like, short-sightedly addicted to screens or to their friends or to peer pressure or whatever, we need to consider that the concern about their social status is actually a potentially positive driver of healthy development. And if we can figure that out, if we can figure out how to harness it rather than work against it, then we can use that sensitivity to promote engagement. And that's more or less what we teach our Fuse teachers to do, is to stop fearing the adolescent brain and start harnessing it. Let me give you an example of one implication of this big idea. And it's that our language and our communication really matters for adolescents. Okay, it's not just the content we put in front of them or even the content of what we say. It's also how we say it. And in my book, I coined this term grown-splaining. And I'm now going to mansplain grown-splaining to you, if you don't mind. And it's basically the idea that we, the grown-ups, have thought everything through. We have all the knowledge and the expertise. And if only young people would listen to us, then they would um, make a good decision. But because their brains are on the mind of a grown splainer, because teenage brains are incompetent or short-sighted or incapable of thinking deeply, then we resort to this communication approach of kind of just telling them what to do in stern terms. Um, and then, of course, when that doesn't work, we get mad at them. So let's take a look at like why that doesn't work. Why is that an affront to what adolescents are hoping and wanting developmentally in this stage? And there's a beautiful study that I love done by Jennifer Silk and with my collaborator Ron Dahl that asks a very simple question. What happens in the teenage brain when your mom is nagging you? Now, it could have been dads and sons, and believe me, I have 4 kids. Like, I'm not perfect, so they could have done this with me. But they did it with moms and daughters, and the study setup is hilarious, in my opinion. So they had the moms complete the sentence, "What bothers me about you is," on tape. And then they brought the daughters in later and put them in the fMRI magnet, and the magnet's swirling around their heads, and it's scanning the blood flow in different regions of their brains while the daughters are listening to that recording of their mom nagging them. Here's an example. This is from the real study. It's amazing to me. This is in like a very nerdy scientific journal, and it's kind of got this hilarious quote from a mom. It's one thing that bothers me about you is that you get upset over minor issues. I could tell you to take your shoes from downstairs. You'll get mad that you have to pick them up and actually walk upstairs and put them in your room. You'll get mad if I tell you that your room is a little dirty and it just needs sweeping and dusting. You get upset if your sisters want to do something that you don't agree on, but 3 of them do, and you don't want to do it. You get upset too easily. You just need to calm that down. All right. Woof. So you can take a guess of what's happening in the daughter's brain when this is happening. So is she saying to herself, you know what, mom, you have a point. I'm really glad you raised this. I got some things to work on. So I'm gonna get right to it, get to work, and check good chat, right? So no, that's not what the young girls are saying in this case. Instead, what you see is in the top right, an increase in the affective regions of the brain consistent with more anger. In the middle, a decrease in cognitive control. So this is like planning to change your behavior, planning for the future. And the last is the social cognitive network. This is like mind reading, right? Is the kid proactively guessing what the mom really wanted her to do with this criticism and then making a plan to enact what the mom really wanted? And what you see there too is a decrease in the temporoparietal junction, the TPJ. Okay. So the punchline is strong negative emotion, very little thinking about how to change. And then this last part about the social cognitive network, the mom is saying one thing, the kid isn't interpreting it the way the mom wants it to. So then the mom gets mad at the kid, presumably, for not listening. And the kid's like, why are you yelling at me? Right. So the adult says one thing, the kid hears another, and then they fight over the misinterpretation. And that's what happens when you grown splain. And it kind of makes sense from the perspective of an adolescent who, at that moment in their life, is desiring the status and respect that comes from being independent, autonomous, being a good decision maker in this age, right? And yell, tell, blame, shame is a threat to that adolescent desire for independence, autonomy, agency, status, etc. Whereas other approaches are less of a threat and might actually engage the adolescent brain. The simplest way to explain this is that when we grown splain, when we yell, tell, blame, and shame, it causes a like puberty induced frontal lobotomy. They're not thinking about how to change, but that's temporary, and we can flip that around with the right communication style. So how do we stop fearing adolescent development and start harnessing it? Our hypothesis is that in general, as a society, adults are stuck between 2 extremes, and they think they're mutually exclusive. Either you're very rigorous, so you're like a high standards tough guy, or you're very supportive. You're very caring and loving. Now, either of those have positive connotations in blue, but unfortunately, both have negative connotations. So the rigorous person might be an authoritarian sadist, and the supportive person might be a whip or a pushover. And it feels like whichever one we gravitate towards, we just have to put up with the negative connotations because that's the price of doing business. We think either you're Arnold Schwarzenegger from the Terminator or you're Arnold Schwarzenegger from Twins, but you can't kind of be the combination. And what we've argued is that to get out of this false dichotomy, you need a change in mindset. And it's not just a growth mindset, it's what we call a mentor mindset in my book, 10 to 25. And so you can think of standards and support as on orthogonal axes. So they're not mutually exclusive dichotomous options. Instead, they can go together. So the goal is to be in the top right here, very high standards, very high support. Now, if you're in the old world of you're either tough or you're nice, then your two options are what we call enforcer or protector mindset. The enforcer mindset is very high standards, but very unsupportive. And your protector mindset is very supportive, but very low standards. Apathetic is just super bad. Don't do that. It's a garbage approach. Don't recommend it. So I won't go into it. But just taking the enforcer. So that's someone who says, young people today need tough standards. They need to be held accountable. We need to expect a lot of them. Maybe they think the world is tough and brutal and uncaring and unforgiving, and I need to prepare them for that. And furthermore, if you think young people's brains are underdeveloped, they lack self-control, they're impulsive, they're kind of like 1 second away from losing control, then maybe I need to enforce insanely high standards just to control these unruly young people, right? We often hear people who think, society's going to hell in a handbasket, and I'm the last bastion of sanity in an insane world. Okay. Now I get it. I understand why people feel that way because it does look like there's chaos in our world, right? And so it does feel like you need to enforce standards. But the problem is, in the enforcer mindset, the only people who meet your standards are the tiny group of people who already have so much support from every other part of their lives that they can make up for the fact that their teacher has no support for them. So you end up with the kids who were already going to get straight A's or whose parents have every resource, right? Or have something already going for them. Those are the only ones who do well in the enforcer mindset classrooms. And that's true, by the way, not just in secondary math, but I spend a ton of time with college professors at UT. I'm constantly shadowing, intro chemistry, organic chemistry, bio, calculus, etc. And we see a lot of enforcer mindset of the look to your left, look to your right, half of you are going to fail kind of mentality. And again, people can rest their head on their pillow saying, I did what kids need, even if they don't like it. And so I understand where it comes from, but it's a misunderstanding because they don't realize you can have support and maintain your equally high standards. So if you're an enforcer, great, add the support. That's our mantra. On the protector side, I see this a lot, especially in low income schools. A lot of the students I interviewed in Texas said this is the pobrecito mentality, the poor little one mentality of like, you're so stressed, you're so overwhelmed, you're experiencing poverty or neglect or whatever it is. And I can't possibly add more stress to your life by making you have to take a hard class. So I'm going to make it as easy as possible. These are the teachers who would give a student a review of everything on the test with basically the answers the night before. So students don't really have to learn anything. They can just memorize and forget and get an A. And then the hypothesis in the protector mindset is if I just let you build your self-esteem bit by bit with lots of success, then maybe you'll come out the end of your educational experience believing in yourself. And it's a reasonable hypothesis. I understand where that comes from, but that's where you get a lot of this self-esteem puff up kind of thing. And ultimately, when I interview students, they tell me they feel afraid of the protector mindset because the adults, they can tell adults don't expect anything of them because the adults believe that they're incompetent or incapable of doing anything important. So the protector mindset too comes out of care and concern, right? But it ultimately falls flat because you're not holding students to high standards. So what we have realized is that you can avoid the grown-splaining of, the enforcer mindset and the kind of pobrecito mentality of the protector mindset by using this mentor mindset of very tough, very demanding, but also very supportive. And ultimately, adolescents feel respected in the mentor mindset because they're being challenged, they're being taken seriously, but you're not like applying this unfair set of rules. You're actually helping them to meet that standard. So they don't think it's unjust. They're not complaining, right? They instead kind of get fired up. And in the mentor mindset, those are the classrooms where students want to run through a brick wall for their teacher. That it really matters to them that their teacher thinks of them as having done important work. Now, you may be saying, I've seen this stuff before, and if so, great. Because I thought I was clever when I came up with this framework, and it turns out that over 80 years of research have shown this. So maybe you're familiar with the concept of warm demander, right, by Fernita Ware, or Kurt Lewin's democratic style, or Diana Baumrein's authoritative parenting, or Kim Scott's radical candor. Those are all different names for this big idea in the top right. And then the enforcer and protector, those have other names in the literature as well. But what's new here about Fuse, and in my book 10 to 25, is that these are not just styles of leadership, these are actual mindsets. That is, they come with coherent belief systems. And in an enforcer and a protector, people tend to have what I call the neurobiological incompetence belief, that they tend to believe teenage brains are incapable of things. That's why in the enforcer, you yell, tell, blame, and shame to get these unruly, immature brains to listen. In the protector, you do everything for them because those brains are incapable. It's only in the mentor that you actually legitimately expect young people to turn their desire for status and respect in the direction of greater learning and engagement. And so once you do that, then all of a sudden a new set of practices starts making more sense to you in the mentor mindset. And frankly, that is why we can do Fuse as light touch as we do and get rather dramatic results a year later. Is we're not giving you a long laundry list of practices you have to memorize and do when there's so many other things you're dealing with as a teacher. We instead give you a mindset, and then we help you put that mindset into practice, this mentor mindset. And then once you do that, a lot of stuff starts making sense to you. So to be concrete, it would never make sense in an enforcer mindset to let students redo their tests if they made mistakes. Because in an enforcer mindset, what we often see is teachers kind of blaming students for not listening the first time. And they're like, I need to yell at you to make you take this seriously. And so a mistake is not their friend. A mistake is a sign that the kid was screwing around. In a mentor mindset, learning from a mistake is normal. Like, it's a good thing. It's kind of how you grow and improve. And I'm going to hold you to that standard of deeply understanding the content. And that's why I expect you to change your mistakes, but I'm going to walk the journey with you. So it's an example where Fuse works in part because we cause a shift in mindset towards the mentor mindset, and then we provide general purpose practices that we allow teachers to adapt and adopt in ways that make sense for them. And then we can do it in a really light touch way that doesn't take up a lot of teachers' time. Let me give you a concrete example of something, and then we'll kind of wrap up. I ran a study on something we call wise feedback. This is a better style of communication that kind of engages the adolescent brain rather than grown-splains and pushes it away. In this study, we had students write first draft essays, and the teachers covered them in comments. And then the students had a chance to turn in a revised essay a week later. And teachers kind of did what they normally do. They wrote like encouragement, but they also wrote feedback. They did the whole compliment sandwich approach. Like, I love your enthusiasm. Your work is terrible and has to change, but thanks for turning it in on time. Like, so it's in their minds, it's two positives and more positives than negatives. We thought, though, that students need more than just that compliment sandwich. They need a transparent statement basically about the teacher's mentor mindset. So that way the student could realize the teacher was using high standards and high support when they were criticizing. And so we had teachers append handwritten notes on half of the essays, And the note said, I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them. So again, it's the high standard and the high support. So it's an appeal to the mentor mindset in one condition. It didn't say wise feedback, by the way. That's just for you, the viewer. And the control group conveyed no information. It just said, I'm giving you these comments so you have feedback on your essay. Okay. And then what we found was that a week later, students were twice as likely to revise their essays when they got wise feedback. And furthermore, we found a rather dramatic reduction in the achievement gap, which we attribute to the idea that students in this school had previously experienced disparities in discipline, and those disparities had caused them to have less trust in educators. But once we applied the high standards and assurance, the wise feedback, students' trust, at least for that teacher at that assignment, was restored. And now once they trusted, then they felt safe taking on this task and trying to improve. So just to sum up, what we're trying to do in Fuse, and what I've tried to write about in my book, is to shift teachers away from, at a minimum, enforcers into mentors. We're worried about protectors too, but this graph, we're starting with enforcers because we found that's the most common approach in secondary math in Texas. In an enforcer mindset, your overall approach is something I call go try harder alone. So that's where teachers say, I already explained it. I already gave you a bunch of worksheets. I was super clear. You had every opportunity to do it. So the fact that you're asking me for help means that you're not willing to put in the work yourself. So go do this on your own, and then I'll talk to you later. Okay. Now, again, I understand why teachers say that, but that's the enforcer mindset. The mentor mindset never does that. They take an approach I call collaborative troubleshooting. So that's where they're like, let's see what this mistake is. All right, well, that's interesting. Where did that come from? What were you thinking here? Well, what would happen if we tried this? So they kind of presume a good faith effort in the student, even if that's a naive presumption. They still presume it because nothing makes adolescents feel more disrespected than assuming something bad about them, even if it's true. But if adults assume it, they are offended. And so in a mentor mindset, they never do that. They take a collaborative troubleshooting approach. The confusion for a student, in an enforcer mindset, confusion is a result of lack of attention or effort or even character. It's like you didn't care, you weren't paying attention, it doesn't matter to you, etc. And in a mentor mindset, it's just your process. You tried it this way, that didn't work. Let's try it this other way. Okay. A mistake in an enforcer mindset, it means the student is low ability, it means they're in the wrong class, or it could mean that they don't care. I mean, I hear it all the time. People are like, these kids' parents never cared about school, so the kid doesn't care about school. So of course they're going to make mistakes because it doesn't matter to them. In a mentor mindset, a mistake is like a golden nugget. It is like your opportunity to clarify something that the kid didn't understand. It's a launching off point. And so Fuse teachers are like thrilled when a student is courageous enough to talk about their mistake publicly. Now, obviously, ultimately, they want students to make fewer mistakes over time. But when a student has the courage to talk about a mistake, then the Fuse teacher using a mentor mindset is like, thank you for doing that because now I can help the entire class because I understand more about what I didn't explain clearly enough to you guys previously. And that's relates to this last point, that in an enforcer mindset, a low achievers question is something that gets this class off track. Teachers are like mad that some slacker is ruining the lesson plan. Whereas in a mentor mindset, questions are opportunities to clarify things or deepen understanding. And so Fuse teachers are trained to treat a low achievers question as this classroom learning moment where everyone can benefit and where I, as a teacher, can now get smarter about how to explain things. So the number one thing Fuse teachers say when a student asks a question is thank you, right? It's because the student had the courage to help the class get smarter. And as you can imagine, all of that stuff is a lot more respectful under the mentor mindset column compared to the enforcer mindset column. And because it's more respectful, then students' puberty sensitized brains all of a sudden become more engaged with the learning content. So we really developed Fuse to go from a one-time change, from a one-time note, like the wise feedback note, to a whole change in teachers' mindsets. And this is my last slide. This is kind of our basic model, is to try to create a whole culture of learning where a teacher has a belief, a set of mindsets that students can learn, of course, their growth mindset, but also this mentor mindset that students' brains are not incompetent, that they can be harnessed. We can capture their attention if we find ways to respect them. And that I'm trying to do that as a teacher so that all students can learn and meet a very high standard. So that's the belief. And then on the bottom left, we want teachers to actually communicate that in their language. The WISE feedback note is a starting off point, but we find from the first day of class, right? The first day of class speeches are important. We help teachers write those. Before and after exams, especially dealing with the stress and anxiety of a low score. Um, your revision policies in class. How do you encourage students to use them? Bottom left. And then there's the bottom right, that we found that students need to see teachers' beliefs and language show up in the actual grading scheme. That if a teacher talks a big talk about their mindset but doesn't act on it, then kids notice the hypocrisy. Teenagers are like evolution's perfectly designed hypocrisy detectors. And so we as adults need to have policies and procedures. For example, the ability to get points back on a missed question, right? Retake a quiz, or at least get partial credit back, so on and so forth. And so we work with teachers to work within the structure of their district, knowing different districts have different rules, to have policies and procedures where you can reward not just effort, but true learning from mistakes. And then when we find that when you have all of that, it builds this pyramid at the top of which is the mentor mindset culture. So I'm going to stop there, but that's kind of the explanation for why we get those results that we get, which we're very excited about. And now, for me as a Texan, my mission in life is to get whatever science we produce out into the state of Texas. And so we're, dying to get more teachers exposed to the latest science that we've conducted and the scientific practices we've created. And so we'd, love to engage with you. And also we would love it if you would tell your friends. This is something where we don't want Fuse to sit like a dusty book on a shelf where, ivory tower nerds like me just talk about it as science, but it never ends up helping the real teachers and kids in schools. And so this is just my gratitude for you for being willing to listen and engaging. And I think, Ryan, we're going to turn it over to you. And I think we have time for Q&A. So thank you guys
Yeah,
very
definitely.
much.
So, yeah, thank you, David, and thank you everybody for hanging with us. As we're leading up, I know what might be your lunchtime here coming soon. I would love, as David mentioned, to talk with everybody about kind of what that might look like in your district, and we can get into details about kind of what the real teacher experience, is throughout Fuse. But as long as we do have a few minutes here, I just want to open it up. If what resonated with you about what Dr. Yeager shared, what questions might you have? Anything sound familiar or something that you might see that as a benefit or something resonate with you at all, just go ahead and you can either unmute and if you're brave and ask a question live, or you can put it in the chat, whatever works best for you. And we're all former teachers, so we know how to wait.
Yeah, chat, or people can just unmute themselves too.
Okay. Okay, so I really appreciate this opportunity. I was just wondering how would this work in an online setting, especially in an after-school online math platform?
Well, I mean, so Fuse fellows are mainly trained on communication and on kind of their philosophy of learning. And so we would work with them to adapt all of these practices to the online setting. Certainly, teachers are at a minimum communicating over text, through emails and so on. If they're meeting live in an online setting, then it can be even more powerful. But yeah, I mean, I think the way that you encourage and motivate a student through online courses shares a lot in common. I think there's just even more of a need to create a human connection. And I'll say, by the way, like I teach 150 undergrads every semester at UT, a large junior senior class, and it's an online class. And I do the same stuff we do in Fuse. I steal stuff from Fuse teachers to use in my class, and it works well online.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just follow up with that point that David mentioned about the philosophy and the communication. So I work with your teachers all year, as does Christian Langford. Christian, give a wave. She's on the call with us as well. She's one of our facilitators. And something I just heard the other morning in one of our coaching sessions was a teacher said, like finally my students are ready to they're happy to enter the conversation about a mistake that they're making when she would go over there and work with them. So many of our teachers have the philosophy. They want to have that mentor type mindset. And they want their students engaging and being willing to raise their hand and take those risks. And some of the language, though they recognize when they're with us, they recognize that some of the language that they've used in the past doesn't land with adolescents the way they think it's going to. So we can help them examine that and test out different ways to talk about mistakes, different ways to talk about assessments that make it much more likely the students are, as she said, so much happier just to have the conversation, about math and about a mistake that they made. So that was exciting to hear from me. Any other questions or comments, things that resonate?
Yeah.
We
Okay,
have a
Monique,
question in
thank you
the
very
chat.
much. Thank you for your question. I appreciate it. Okay, yeah. So how can administrators foster the culture shift? So, there's a couple of things. So one is, and Monique, were you on our other webinar? Yes, our book club yesterday? Okay, great. Good to see you again.
I was on yesterday.
Okay, great. Yeah, I liked your comment yesterday about the enforcer protector. So we found that there's different underlying fears that enforcers have versus protectors. So I think the biggest fear for an enforcer is the descent into chaos that would happen if I ever stopped demanding compliance at all times with what I say. And for those people, we make the argument that adolescents willingly comply when they feel respected, and then you don't have to waste a bunch of energy threatening or bribing anymore. And so there's more to it than that, but we make that argument on the first day of Fuse. And so but the key thing there is that we call it a values alignment approach. It's like a social psychology tactic. And the basic idea is rather than get a teacher to care about something different, we convince them that a better practice is the way to get what they already care about. And what they care most about is like maintaining order and not having chaos, then we say basically a better way to get that is through this respectful practice of mentor mindset. For the protector, their biggest worry generally is like kids' feelings. They're worried that kids are going to crumble and get anxious and get stressed. And partially they don't want to be the cause of distress. Partially they're worried about having that conversation. Like they don't know what to say if a kid cries. And so they want to protect the kid, oftentimes because of the insecurity of the teacher and what would happen if a kid got too emotional or anxious. And so for those teachers, we make a different argument. We basically say, look, anytime a kid's doing something hard, that's an opportunity for them to grow. Like if it was already easy for them, then it'd be pointless. But the fact that it's hard means they're going to be stressed. So the stress is actually often a good sign that they're being challenged. And furthermore, when they have that racing heart, they're breathing hard, their palms are sweaty, that's actually their body mobilizing oxygenated blood to their brains and their muscles. And then with more oxygen in your brain and your muscles, then you're actually performing better. So we call that a synergistic mindset. And we give that to all of our Fuse teachers too. And that ends up helping the protectors feel less bad about causing distress, because distress is reframed as a resource that helps optimize performance rather than as a liability. So that sounds convoluted, and we don't do this all up front, but we found that is the most effective way so far to get people out of their protector mindset. That and just noticing that your kids actually are capable of really good stuff. So when our Fuse teachers talk to other Fuse teachers, they're like, oh my God, your kids do what? That alone causes teachers raise their standards for kids. So that it's, oh yeah, so then you asked, what can administrators do? I mean, that's so there's versions of that, but honestly, I think, Monique, your question is what we want to build out next. So we're actually hoping that we can build a network of current Fuse districts to build out the supports for instructional coaches and admins. And that's the next. We started with teachers for obvious reasons, because they're directly related to kids. But the next step is, how do we help admins help the teachers? And we want to do R&D, and if you have ideas, we'd love to collaborate on that.
And
All right. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Jamie, and then
No, Jamie, go for it.
I saw Julia nodding her head too. So either you're just very polite or something stood out to you. So yeah, Jamie.
No, because with what you were saying to Monique, and I am an instructional specialist, and I work with our instructional coaches. And with that whole visual of a mentor mindset versus protector mindset, I feel like a lot of our ICs live in that world of protector mindset over their teachers, right? So this not only applies to students, but also how are we modeling these things for our teachers as well? Because many of them do. They give all the support so much that we start building things for teachers and creating all the things for teachers,
Right.
and then lower standards because we're so scared to like lose educators, obviously, because of burnout and all of the things. And so we do offer too much support and set maybe lower standards. And how can we start shifting and modeling that mentor mindset more? And how can that then transfer into our classes as well? So I really liked that visual.
I would say that one big insight we had, just talking to so many people, we learned a lot writing this stuff, is that people conflate logistical rigor with intellectual rigor. So like a lot of teachers think, oh, I'm a rigorous teacher, and that's why you can't ever turn in late work. And it's like, well, but then what if they got a 0 and then they need that for the EOC? Like, when are they ever going to learn that content? Or you can't ever get points back. Well, like, if you got a 50 on a test, like, I want you to know that other 50%. So when are you going to learn it? And I see this a lot with college professors too. They're super inflexible with deadlines, but then the kids never meet the highest standard for intellectual work. Whereas the Uri Treisman, who founded the Dana Center, he's a legendary educator. I write about him in my book. I sat in the back of his calculus class for 2 years, just watched what he did. And he's very logistically flexible, and intellectually, he's incredibly demanding. And there's tons of crying in his class, but it's not because he's mean. It's because it's super hard to master calculus. And so I think there's something similar where with administrators, we often don't expect educators to innovate and create stuff because they're going to complain it's too hard. We didn't tell them what to do exactly. And now we find that in Fuse, we are asking educators to innovate. We're asking them to create practices aligned with a mentor mindset and adapt them, and then do a presentation at the end of the year on what worked for them. So it's intellectually very hard, but we make it super logistically easy. It's like, how it works with your schedule. Let's do online, like whatever you need, like really good customer service. So we kind of try to live that version of mentor mindset with our Fuse fellows. And ultimately, they do like the idea that they are intellectual creators and contributors because we're respecting them as professionals. But no one likes logistically awful paperwork, And I think often in districts, we get stuck like with the paperwork, and that stuff sucks. But what teachers really want to do is make up ways of being awesome teachers intellectually. And they're willing to do that if we make it logistically easy.
Hi, David. This is
Hi,
Julia, who was nodding and not just to be polite.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Actually, the reason that I was intrigued with what you're saying is, as an administrator, I'm a superintendent, and I'm looking at this to try to bring it to my district. So I'm as far to the dark side as you could possibly be. But I have always kind of operated from the belief that if we're asking teachers to stretch and grow, and we're not providing an intellectually and emotionally safe environment for them to do that and make mistakes and fail forward, then we're not being good mentors. And I don't think that there's a lot of work in the field that helps us know how to do that. Sometimes we're having to kind of do that instinctively. So I think some training for administrators on how to be good intellectual mentors. I really liked the intellectual versus logistical rigor. I'm going to use that. I think that there's a lot of work out there in the space that needs to be done, and we're kind of hungry for it. So if we're going to ask teachers to support students in that way, we have to support teachers in that way. So that's why I was nodding, not politeness.
Yeah, I would stay in touch on that. And we're doing a book club
Okay.
with Carol Dweck and I are going to be on it. So if you join and bring that up as a topic, I would love to discuss it. And I would also say that, the reason why I wrote the book at the Holdsworth Center is because of their work supporting leaders and administrators. And what you just described is the number one thing I heard when I would talk to all the superintendents who were in their residency during lunch. And it's there are a lot of challenges, but there's a ton of opportunities. And I think every great leader knows you have to lead with integrity. So if you're going to say mentor mindset is the thing, you have to live it yourself. And that it stinks if you then don't know how to do it. Like, what am I supposed to do to live with integrity? So I think let's continue that conversation. And I would love your thoughts and input.
That would be great. Let's do that.
Okay. Does everyone feel satisfied with the questions they were able to ask? I don't want anyone to leave feeling cheated out of an opportunity to talk. The AI note taker could talk if needed.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so Ryan, you want to close this out?
Yeah, let me just wrap up real quick. So I'm gonna follow up with everybody, by email. You're gonna get a recording of this. I'm also gonna my ask for you is if this resonated with you all today, is that you respond and we can talk about it and how it might fit in your district. Every district's different. We work with about 40 of them right now, all around the state. So large districts, small districts. I really want to know how we can kind of personalize and cater your teacher's experience to make sure they get the most out of Fuse, wherever they come from within the state or beyond. Again, we'll have some outside of Texas next year as well. So be on the lookout for that. And we'll we have these every month. Our topics change somewhat. Sometimes it's just about Fuse. Today we were able to have Dr. Yeager here to go into more depth on the book, but you'll be getting more emails, with invites. Please share them with your friends, others in your district. And we're just looking to get to know you better and for hopefully talk about how we can support your work. So thank you, everybody.
And please spread the word. Like, if you know someone else who you think would benefit from it, Julia, Monique, Jamie, Paula, etc. We'd love to have your friends hear about it as well. So thank you very much.
All right, everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right, and this time I did not end it.
You did not end it. Good. I wrote down all their names just in case.
Okay.
It's funny that
How do I stop the recording? Not recording. Stop recording.